All right, guys, what's going on? I figured I'd do a quick one real quick because I got like 3 or 4 inboxes. People asking me about what I thought about RH 40 today, the congressional meeting to consider it throwing it into a bill. And wow, it's a lot to cover here. So I'll unpack this as much as I can. All right, so first, we have Danny Glover, which supersedes everything. This is the person that everyone's talking about as far as giving his angle on what he thought were both economical setbacks, what he thought social setbacks, the repercussions of internet culture, if you want to say. And with all these things said, the funny thing about it is there were only, I believe, 3 economists, the people that were actually economists. I didn't catch each one of them's name. I'll actually have to go back because when I was watching the stream, it was live. So I didn't get the chance to catch everybody's entire name. And the few people that I did catch the name, those people sat out a little bit more to me, particularly a man named Mr. Hughes. Mr. Hughes decided to go in front of council and, okay, I want to start here. So unbeknownst to me, there's actually, within the demographic of African Americans, there's actually a 1/3% that are actually against this reparations. They're actually against actually even considering it to a bill because I can tell from the bulk majority of them, they feel this way. They feel that as if, I guess the word you could say pretty much clearly is they feel that the generation that was owed those reparations or whatever the case may be have long been buried and gone. They feel that the people that were basically responsible for those being deemed responsible for reparations are dead and gone. So now what we come up to is we come up to a highlight of 2019, and now we ask ourselves, okay, who in the current generation is worth going after? That is going to be the question that's repeatedly put towards people. And this is why I say, and I think many are saying, instead of that, I think the legal, if you're going to take this from a legal approach, because legality is in this, this was a federal hearing. So this wasn't something that was, thought over, put together in 2 minutes. This was a federal hearing. And RH 40, I think it's a great idea. I like some of the people, their positions they had. I think it was some noteworthy ideas outside of Donald Glover and his superstar. I think that was great. But more importantly, what I think that I like the most about it is we actually got into dollar amounts. And I think that's what needs to be had. Now, this is a problem. To cover this in totality, we're talking about 38 million African Americans in U.S. society right now. And many of those African Americans that are in U.S. society right now, we have to also fit in the fact that a lot of them come from immigration, which in some cases, not all cases, are a little less than 2 generations back. So do they fit into the dynamic of receiving these type of reparations? No. Most would say anyway. And if they do, they would more so deserve it from their respective countries, which were under colonization too, just to put it short. But the problem is, there's no real way of counting this because in the Americas, you also had people from Brazil, you also had colonists that were from Brazil, Uruguay, Germany, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's no real totality of where to cover this. Now, if we're talking about a dollar amount, we've got to start in the trillions. Now, that's 38 million people. So if you divide that up, you're talking about regularly, monetarily speaking, maybe $4,000 to $5,000 per person. Some people get more than that in their taxes. But this is the totality of it. Not to only mention that once you receive the settlement, the argument is over. The argument is completely over. It can never be brought up again because you're talking about basically what a lot of people miss is what you're talking about is a legal obligation or contractual obligation that the U.S. government at that time decided to sign. They decided to sign it. They decided to put it within speech and language that was translated legally. And because of basically the premise of that, what has happened is that fulfillment of that contractual agreement has not been fulfilled. That is the argument that needs to be had. I think the specifics behind it, I think not only the specifics behind it, but how everybody is just turning to the monetary end of it, I don't think that's going to be successful in the end run. What I actually think is, I think that's going to be one of the cues that actually knocks down it. Many people won't understand what I'm saying by that. I'm 50-50 with it. Congressman, I don't know if he was a congressman or he's a speaker or whatever the case his name is, but the man's name is Hughes, and I'm pretty sure some of his talking points, they will take some of his talking points and chop them up on news. So I'm pretty sure if you haven't heard of him yet, because this is still early, I think today when I was listening to it, I didn't get a chance to physically watch it, but I got a chance to listen to it. So I just had one earphone on and I was listening to it, and I gathered as much as I could. That's why I'm not sure who everybody looked like and everybody's last name, because it was kind of like, you intercede, you have 5 minutes to speak. If somebody wants to interrupt you and concede your notion, or whatever the case may be, they're allowed to do so. So what happened, I think, more importantly, was we actually got the conversation started. There's several different people that can be thanked for this. There's several different people that we can have the whole narcissistic approach and say, okay, it was their idea, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But in reality, I don't want to do that. What I want to do is more focus on this, for one. I don't want any hypocrisy to come into it. So if you have not watched the hearings, which is pretty much about 2.5 hours long, if you haven't watched the hearings, don't join into the conversation. Don't join into the conversation. Actually watch the 2.5 hours worth of the hearings, then come back and then give me your opinion on it. I've gotten into a couple of questions today where people have seen news clips that are probably like 2 minutes long, in some cases 3 minutes long, and based off a 2-minute or 3-minute news clip, they decide to kind of retort and have this long digested answer that literally, if you just listen to the testimony, if you just listen to whatever the case may be, you would actually get it out on your own. So I don't want that type of conversation going on. I need actually people that actually was in the conversation, people that actually watched the testimony, people that actually delved into some of the ideas that were presented as far as monetarily, as far as procedure-wise, as far as a lot of things getting amended. I think that's where a lot of it falls in their hand. We're talking about the 14th and 15th Amendment in a lot of cases being an amendment. And as much as I like to pray and hope and guess that this might lead to an actual sitting where there's actually a bill to actually vote on and Congress passes this, whether it be monetary or whatever the case may be. Right now, this is just a theory. I like the point that the conversation was had. I like the point that not only the conversation was had, but it was actually engaged, and it was engaged for a good amount of time. It was over 2.5 hours of engagement. So I can appreciate that. I can appreciate the fact that some people actually had not only symptoms and reasons why that happened in particular, but more so in the fact that they actually had solutions. Solutions that maybe everyone may not agree with, solutions that maybe everyone may not concede will work in the end, but nevertheless solutions. So do we sweep it under the rug and play like king of the Indians or chief of the Indians and say, okay, well, it was my idea, and we argue and babble about that? Or do we actually take some of the consideration into some of the suggestions that were given? I think out of the whole entire speech, I heard maybe 65% of what was translatable towards an end goal. It may not be an immediate goal. It may be a goal that it will take maybe 5 to 10 years, but nevertheless a goal never indeed. And I don't think anything like this, even if you had 10 people within the culture that actually received reparations and they put their money together and started a multi-million-dollar business, you still would not have enough monetarily to change the dynamic of what you want to and see to do. So it's a 50-50 for me. I like the conversation, like I said. I like the fact that the bill might actually be brought up. You understand what I'm saying? These were just talks. These were talks about, and if a lot of people don't know, these were actually talks about, excuse me guys, these were actually talks about the consideration of actually starting not only a dialogue, but also starting a dialogue that could have an end game to it. And I think that's more profitable for me. You know what I mean? And so, there's a lot of things there that, and I don't want to mumble and babble along. There's things that was also mentioned earlier today, and I don't think if anybody knew. They also had a hearing on poverty, which was very interesting considering the fact that both of these were unilateral as far as because if you're talking about long-term stimulation, if you're talking about long-term tragedy, long-term theory, long-term what you're actually talking about is you're talking about very much to say what leads and intercedes into poverty. So based on the fact that it is about poverty, it was weird to me that they both had not only these talks, but they also had a separate boardroom going on, and they were discussing in another hearing about poverty in the United States. And it sits right now in the United States, there's 45% of people living in poverty. Even if they work, we have a terminology for it, it's called the working poor. If many of y'all have never heard of that terminology, I suggest you look it up. It's a real thing. It's where, especially here in New York, where people are working and bustling their day-to-day life, and they're just barely making ends meet. Now, I saw a report that it's something like 85% of the average New Yorker, their actual income goes into paying rent and bills. 85%. That is a substantial amount. But at the same time, you can't compare where not only New York is, but New York is pays $15 an hour for minimum wage. It's been such since January 1st. But what's happening now is you're getting a lot of commuters that are coming into New York to work, and then they're leaving out and they're living in the suburbs. Like me, I was in Connecticut, okay? So it's a fair, even game. Even if you're paying towards your costs and traveling, it still works out for you, because now you're still averaging about $13 an hour roughly before taxes, where versus in Connecticut, minimum wage is $10, okay? So, and it fluctuates from $10 up to all the way up to, I think, $11 or $12 if you're in the casinos or, something like that. So you're talking about a high fluctuation of people that are commuting back and forth. Now, the reason because of that is they're trying to escape poverty in the areas they are, because in both terms, it's messed up. If you live in the suburbs, you have costs traveling, so you still incur costs. If you live in the city, you have subway, travel costs, eating costs, things like that that are substantially more higher than if you go out to the suburbs. I'll give you an example. The average meal at McDonald's is probably $10 here, where if I go out in the suburbs, the average McDonald's dinner might be $7. So it fluctuates with that. But I guess now we're living in an age where even these employers, if they're paying $15 an hour, most of these people, they're hiring you part-time. They're not hiring you full-time unless you have a skill set. Thank God I do. But unless you have a skill set, or you're the type of person that works freelance, you're not really looking at long-term work. What you're looking at is like subjective, momentarily employment situations, if I want to say. These momentary employment situations are not going to be the facet of the days of old where you could go work at a company for 20 years and you would end up retiring from there. This is not the type of world that we live in anymore. And I'm glad kind of that I was actually able to not only say I'm young enough that I'm matriculated out of it and into it rather, but I'm old enough to understand the dynamic of when I see it. And some people will say, okay, well, it's easy for you to say because you worked in the music business for so long. I worked in the music business for 16 years, but the music business and how the dynamic of internet coincides, it's really, the internet supersedes the music business now, to be honest with you. It's the perfect conduit as far as advertising. The advertising is free. And sad enough, it's also the advertising of people that independently say the wrong things. You have a lot of people that were online like Alex Jones and numerous others that were saying things or persuading people to do things, snake oil salesmen. And these people, they were removed from certain platforms. Like Alex Jones, I think he got removed from YouTube. He definitely got removed from Facebook and a couple other ones. I think a lot of that has to do with the federal government and the hearings they had with Mark Zuckerberg last year that lasted, I think it was the totality of those meetings were like something like 11 hours. So it was a substantial amount of time with these hearings with Mark Zuckerberg and everybody else. The one thing I'll say is this: if we don't continue to have this conversation, I think in the long haul, even if it was momentarily just a little bit of money, I think that would go a long way for some certain people. It would at the very least give them an option. Now that option of whatever you choose to do is your gripe. But what I don't want to hear is, and I don't want to hear from mine is, oh my God, we're back in this situation. You can't do it anymore. So if anything, say this happened tomorrow. You get the allotted money, whatever, $4,000, $5,000, and you wait until tax return season comes on. You don't go buy a new car. You don't go buy some new sneakers. That is not reparations. The reparations that I'm talking about is actually engaging and putting your money into something that builds, whether it be stocks, whether it be considering any factor that has to do with investing the money and letting the money mature. That's the way that a lot of people like Boyce Watkins and many of others, they try to issue and put in the minds of people. And even though we have this different palette now where we have a lot of people that are doing that, the age ranges go from 24 years old to 18 years old all the way up to 49, 60, 70 years old. People recreating themselves, people putting out their own businesses and doing what they must. So reparations, I think, is a great idea. Don't be fooled and think you're going to see a significant amount of money. You're not. Even $1 trillion divided up between 38 million people, it's not going to be a substantial amount of money. I think you're more so profitable if you do go after the monetary reimbursement, because it is, like I said, a contractual agreement. So it's a contractual agreement. If held under federal courts, it would be upheld. But the problem is, if you're going to put the money out, make the money your latter point. I think you need to more consist of policy. I think some suggestions that I had that I heard and I loved that I already had previously were free tuition. I think that's a good idea, especially at local schools, giving them some type of tax break or some type of endowment yearly. I mean, out of the span of a year. None of this, even if you got it tomorrow, right? None of this is going to be spanned out where everybody gets their money simultaneously. This is going to be a process that takes 8, 10, 20 years. Some people might not even see it in their lifetime, which if it comes to someone handing out money federally, most of the time that's what you're going to see. It happens in local judicial courts, in settlements that are key settlements as far as, Jesus Christ, I'm trying to think of it, civil lawsuits. So don't expect much. What I think you should put your hand on, or your hammer hand on right now, give me 1 second, guys, is policy. Policy, ramifications, education, things like that. I think those things matter a little bit more. I know when I always talk about the music business, I give you guys like the most detailed way I can without exposing what some of the things you might individually come across, some of the things you might not individually come across. But they are there. They are factors. I've worked at Interscope, Arista, Atlantic Records. There's shitloads of pictures on my page if you guys want to go through and look through videos and all that stuff or whatever. And I enjoyed it. I think the message now is how much music cultivates into the political process. And I hope this guy behind me gets it too, because I'm going to tell you straight up, this is going to be one of the few times that I give my political opinions. You got 23 Democratic candidates, right? And there's only one of them that is possibly leading depending on who the polls are checking, and that's supposed to be Joe Biden currently. And Joe Biden, naturally, because he was a past vice president, has the edge. But the other 22, it almost looks like, you ever see Animal Crackers? He had Captain Spaulding and all this, it kind of looks like that. Scooby-Doo running for president, I don't know. The socialist views, I'm not in attention with. I liked another thing today as far as like the reparations talk. A lot of people pointed to the Democratic Party because naturally, in the times of Frederick Douglass, all the way to Noble Drew Ali, all these people were actually Republicans. At one time, the Democratic Party didn't even deal with blacks. If you go back and you do some history checking for yourself, everybody's got Google, I would inform you to check out the Dixiecrats. The Republican Party, I will say, has matriculated on both ends. The Democratic Party has definitely matriculated back slowly. Instead of racism, what they're doing now is they're actually switching it for libertarianism and socialism. So I think personally, the Democratic Party is more so of a socialist party, more so, and some of the candidates, they invoke that. So, I mean, if you just look at some of the people that are running, especially Bernie Sanders, I would tell you to pay close attention to him. He's a socialist. If you don't know what socialists are, I can tell you 2 socialist governments you're probably familiar with. The Nazis, to start off, the SS, and the second one would be Venezuela currently. And you see what's going on down there. So those are, I think socialism kind of, some people, they kind of run it unilaterally with communism in a way, but it's not really. But in a way it is, because the government is actually responsible for everything as far as like your medicine, there's a government facility for your food, there's a government facility, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you're not familiar with socialism, look it up, do some investigation of it. But primarily, the most of the Democratic Party now is socialist candidates. Do I agree with them? It's up to debate. I don't necessarily agree with them. I don't necessarily hate them either. So I'll leave it at that. But good talk today. I like the reparations talk. I thought it was a great idea. I saw some very good ideas put out there. I think Danny Glover, he really did an excellent job. As far as Mr. Hughes, I'm not sure what he was talking about per se. I think Mr. Hughes was trying to be a conformist, and it did work for him. So if you get a chance, go out and check Mr. Hughes's quotes I'm sure they're floating through the news. They usually, news outlets, they take these clips and they wrap them together in a 2 or 3 minute reel or whatever. But go check them out. If you haven't seen the full hearings, I would suggest you do. It's long, so you're probably going to have to do it in segments as a break in between. So the whole entire thing is probably like 3 hours long. So go check it out. Get your own opinion, form your own opinion, jot down some things that you think set more poignant out than others. If there's any type of change.org or anything like that, there's a second session of meetings that can be had to figure out whether or not this is something to be taken to bill. Once again, I'll say, stop putting your interest into monetary reimbursement and more so into the acres and the mule. All right, guys, I'm out of here. Eagle the Black Jew, as always, coming from Trump Tower. I will talk to you guys later.